The second followers choice poll I did on my Instagram channel several weeks ago was all about crazy flavors. And let me tell you, I had a lot of wild flavors submitted, but when it came down to it, more of the tame kind of things were in the final four. And the one that won out was goat cheese with some kind of fruit. I decided that I was going to make the fruit apricot, and I wanted to pair that not only with goat cheese but with some pistachios and then also honey. So the pistachios are coming in just on the top of my macaron shell, and even though I'm doing a goat cheese or like slightly savory macaron, I didn't want to do anything different from my macaron shell. So everything like this is just my regular French method: room temperature egg white, streaming in some sugar and cream of tartar, whipping that to a really nice stiff peak, and then I'll add in my powdered sugar and almond flour. I probably could have pulverized some of my pistachios even finer and added them right into the shell, but I did want to have that sprinkle and a really good visual and a bit of an extra crunch on the outside of the shell, which is why I opted to just have the pistachios on the outside as more of a decoration and that crunch element. But if you tried to remake this at home, absolutely go for substituting some of the almond flour for like a pistachio flour, really finely ground pistachios if you want to. I am just incorporating all the dry ingredients in about 3 additions, folding everything together until I don't see any pockets of the flour and powdered sugar. Then I'm going to go ahead and add in more of the dry ingredients until everything is incorporated. Then I'm going to go on to the macaronage process, kind of scraping and folding my macaron batter against the sides of my bowl until I have achieved the ribbon stage, which is when I pull my spatula up and the batter falls back down like a ribbon and slowly, within about 30 seconds, kind of disappears back into the rest of the batter in the bowl. Then I'm going to transfer this to a piping bag fitted with my piping tip, and I'll be ready to pipe. I am using a silicone mat that already has a macaron template in it. You can also use whatever works best for you, whether that's a silicone mat and you have your own template, or if you just want to eyeball the shells, or if you like to bake on parchment paper or a Teflon baking sheet, something like that. There are a lot of options out there. So with macarons, I always recommend doing some of your own trial and error and seeing what works best for you in your kitchen where you're living with the ingredients and tools you have on hand, because it really can vary from person to person and kitchen to kitchen. I'm just going to pipe this entire tray of macaron shells, just regular circles here. Then I'm going to tap the tray and sprinkle on the chopped up pistachios before the macs have a chance to form that skin that I'm looking for before I put the macarons into the oven to bake them. If you wait too long to sprinkle on something like nuts or any other sprinkle, the skin can start forming and it's going to be really hard for whatever that decoration is to attach and bake into the macarons. Otherwise, they'll just fall off after if you've sprinkled that on. So if you are making a larger batch and you have a bunch of trays, every tray or two stop to sprinkle on whatever it is. Otherwise, you might run into difficulties later. Also, make sure that you're tapping your tray first to smooth out the tops of the shells before you sprinkle things on, or whatever you're sprinkling could go flying. After I get these all sprinkled on, I'm going to set my macaron trays just to the side and leave them just at room temperature on my counter for anywhere from 15 to 20, 25 minutes. This might change a lot depending on where you live and the climate you are living in, so do what works best for your kitchen. I'm just really letting a nice skin form on the macaron shells before I put the first tray into the oven. Then I'm going to bake these at 300 degrees Fahrenheit for about 16 to 18 minutes before letting them cool completely and removing them from the silpat. Meanwhile, I want to start working on the filling. I wanted to go for an apricot filling, but because it is winter and I don't have access to some really good ripe apricots, I decided to use dried fruit and then also some canned fruit to create my own puree. So first I have the dried apricots and I am just cubing these up into nice little bite-sized pieces. Whatever size you are cutting it into, just remember this is going to be put on the inside of the macaron shell inside of a goat cheese buttercream ring. So make sure that it's small enough that you're able to put several cubes of apricot inside of your macaron shell. Unless you want just like one ginormous piece, then I guess go for that. Then I'm taking some of the canned apricots and I'm just pureeing them in my blender. There's nothing else in here, no water, no sugar, nothing. Then I'm mixing it with a little bit of water in my saucepan with a tiny bit of sugar, some honey, and then I'm also going to throw some fresh thyme sprigs in here. I'm basically creating like an apricot thyme simple syrup, and then I'll be adding in the dried apricot pieces once that starts simmering. My goal here is to use this simple syrup to rehydrate the dried apricots, and then with the extra sugars and honey and the sweetness from the apricot puree that we made to kind of start caramelizing a bit. So I'm rehydrating the dried apricots and then I'm kind of creating this caramely, syrupy, jammy bit to kind of help everything stick together and not create a really soggy inside for the macaron. I was a little bit hesitant. I didn't want there to be too much of a thyme flavor because it can be really overwhelming. So after I simmered this simple syrup for a while, I did decide to take the thyme out of it. But the thyme flavor ended up being really light at the end. So I think you probably could leave the thyme in there for the duration of creating this. I don't know. I'm still playing around with that portion of the recipe, but depending on how much of a thyme flavor you like, you might want to take it out or leave it in longer, depending on that taste. After I had the simple syrup simmering for a while and I took out the thyme sprigs, I added in the apricot cubes and then I just let it boil until most of the liquid had evaporated and it was looking really nice and the apricots were looking plump and juicy and there wasn't a lot of liquid remaining. Then I just took it off the heat, put it into my refrigerator so that could cool completely before I used it in my macarons. Now on to the star of the show. I was so happy with how this goat cheese buttercream turned out. I used a really soft goat cheese and then I have some room temperature butter as well, and I'm going to make a Swiss meringue buttercream, and that is best because I'm adding just a little bit of sugar and the main sweetness and then also flavor is coming from honey. I think with other kinds of buttercream, whether it's French or Italian or American, it can be a lot harder to incorporate, not impossible, but it's harder to reduce the amount of sugar and add in an element like honey instead. I think that Swiss is really the way to go. So I have the sugar, the honey, and the egg whites on a double boiler. The one thing you'll notice is missing from a more standard buttercream recipe, I'm not adding any vanilla, I'm not adding any other extracts or anything. I'm trying to keep this as purely honey, goat cheese, butter forward as possible. So as soon as that egg white mixture is really nice and hot, the sugar is dissolved, I'm transferring it into my stand mixer to whip up into a really nice meringue until it's cooled off a lot before adding in the butter and the goat cheese. So for this, if I added in the butter too soon, first of all, it would deflate the meringue we're trying to form, and that would completely defeat the purpose of going through this meringue whipping process. Second of all, it's really quite warm in there right now, and the butter might get a little bit melty and weird. So we're both trying to create a really nice structure for the meringue and cool it off so that it is warm but not hot, or it's just about room temperature before I start adding in the butter. Once the meringue is looking really nice and fluffy, it's lightened in color a lot, then I'm going to start adding in the butter, just a cube at a time. I did decrease the speed there a little bit. I had my stand mixer on more of like a medium-high speed, and now it's on more of a medium-low, just to make sure things don't go flying out everywhere. This does have less butter than usual in a Swiss meringue buttercream because I'm adding in a ton of goat cheese, but because the goat cheese is quite soft, I was a little bit nervous that if I didn't include any butter, that the goat cheese wouldn't have the strength and the structure to hold up nicely in a macaron shell. Also, goat cheese has a lot more moisture, and I was a little bit worried that if that's all that it was, or if that was even like 80-90% of what I added in, that both the structure and the moisture content would start messing with my macaron shells. So first I added in all the butter and I let that really just incorporate, and it's starting to look like it's coming together. That is, I think, a really good sign. Once it's looking like that, after I've given it a couple minutes to start whipping together, then I'm gonna add in the goat cheese and continue whipping until I have a really nice, silky, smooth buttercream texture. Depending on the kind of goat cheese you use, depending on the kind of butter you use, you may want to have more or less of either one of those things. So if you are making this with the same quantities I have down below in the description box, just know that you may need to add more or less butter or more or less goat cheese, just like any other buttercream. With a Swiss meringue buttercream or an Italian meringue buttercream, again, depending on the brand of butter, the kind of butter, all different kinds of variables might lead you to using more or less at certain times. And that is completely okay. It's completely normal. I did find that it took a little bit longer than usual for this goat cheese buttercream to come together, but once it did, oh my gosh, was it ever silky and smooth and a really nice goat cheese flavor and texture, but not too overwhelming because it still had the butter and that Swiss meringue kind of structure at the base of it. It had the honey in there. It's really lovely. I'm really excited to play around with this a lot more. This is another thing that if you wanted to add in more flavor into this portion, you absolutely could add a bit of thyme in here as well. You could add some pistachio paste. You could add any number of things really easily after you've got that goat cheese incorporated at the end. Just add in whatever other flavors you'd like before it's finished mixing. So I'm just piping a ring of that goat cheese buttercream. Then I'm going to go in with that completely chilled apricot. I'm going to call it a compote, but it's sort of a dried fruit situation. And then I'm going to sandwich these shells and they will mature just like normal in the refrigerator. I have gotten a lot of questions about, do my savory macarons mature more quickly than other macarons? I would say that these ones matured at about the same rate as any other macaron that has a fruit filling. I was a little bit worried about it, but again, as I mentioned before, I wanted to make kind of a more standard buttercream base and then add the goat cheese into that. And I think that that really helped keeping with a normal structure and a normal process for how long it takes to mature the macarons. They didn't get soggy, and again, using the dried fruit as the base for the filling, I think went a long way in really making sure that this was a really nice texture and still had a lot of really bright flavor in it. If you bite into the macs right away, the shell might be a little bit crispy and your filling might squidge out everywhere, so make sure to let them mature for about 24 hours before you bite into them, and then they'll be ready to go. Seriously, I was so happy with how these turned out. I'm really excited to start playing with more goat cheese based macarons in the future, and I really hope you give it a try as well. Thank you so much for everyone who voted for this flavor for my followers choice macaron tutorial. I really hope you guys give it a try. Let me know, tag me on Instagram if you do at Maddie Brame. I'd love to see your end results. Make sure to subscribe down below as well so you don't miss out on any of my future upcoming tutorials. Until next time, have a wonderful day. Bye.